probably one of the biggest issues we see is the persona creation, and then it gets put in a drawer and it's never seen again. And in reality, humans are chaotic, they're messy, they're not straightforward and simple. And so what we need to do when we really talk about defining our buyers, and in the book, I talk about creating twins, which are an evolution of a persona, that your twins need to be a little bit messy. You need to put a little bit more data in there, and it needs to be a little bit more chaotic.
Welcome to the Buyer-Centric OS. Buyer-Centric OS, a system for revolutionary customer experience. With your hosts, Andy Halko and Tony Zayas. This show helps you turn guesswork into growth by putting your buyer at the center of everything.
All right, welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk more on the topic of your buyer, as we always do on the Buyer-Centric OS show. We're going to talk about the concept of your buyer persona. Is it a lie? Are there some things that you think you know about your buyer that you don't actually? So, Andy, this is kind of a common trap. We're going to talk about a couple things here today. What do you see in this area where people kind of miss the mark when they believe they understand who their persona is, and it's a miss?
Yeah, this is a big one, right? I think a lot of organizations create personas. There are definitely a lot that don't have them. And probably one of the biggest issues we see is the persona creation, and then it gets put in a drawer and it's never seen again. But even if you have them, there are some challenges that you'll end up facing. I think one is the myth of the perfect persona. And what that is you'll see marketing teams put together this slide deck. And it's a single slide with a smiling photo, the title, and some really neat, orderly panes and demographics, 35 to 45. And they're creating these fantasies, these perfect personas. And in reality, humans are chaotic, they're messy, they're not straightforward and simple. And so what we need to do when we really talk about defining our buyers, and in the book, I talk about creating twins, which are an evolution of a persona, that your twins need to be a little bit messy. You need to put a little bit more data in there, and it needs to be a little bit more chaotic. That's one of the benefits of creating twins and leveraging AI, is that it can include more information and understand the nuance of chaos, and that, you know, your persona isn't that slide that's just so perfect that everybody looks at and thinks, ooh, that's the exact buyer, right?
Yeah, and I love how you said that, you know, the chaos and the messiness, and that's, human beings are complex and a lot more chaotic than any slide deck can explain. What do you see when teams build out personas? Is it sometimes they're building kind of a fantasy, like you said, this is somewhat of a fantasy? Are they creating more of a buyer persona of hope?
Yeah, I think so. That's kind of the next trap within this, is that a lot of times, not only is it based off of hope, but it's based off of their best customer. We touched a little bit on this, I think, in the last episode, but we have a tendency to talk to the people that are most vocal, that are our biggest fans. You know, I have clients where one of their top customers is someone that they've had a relationship for 20 years. And when they talk about their ideal customer, they're talking about their friend. And so what you see in organizations is they're not building personas off of the sales that didn't close. They're not building personas off of the customers that are unhappy because they want to put that in a drawer and ignore it. Like someone says, I don't like this, let's be honest. Most people are probably like, oh, they're the outlier. I can't stand them. But they shouldn't be. They should be part of that persona of the person that, didn't like something and had an issue. The other one is quiet folks. Sometimes we have buyers and we have customers that just don't speak up. They don't talk a lot. And there is something hidden in there that is probably really valuable that we're not getting from the super vocal folks or our best friends. And so what I end up seeing is these persona slides are not only hope, but they're also based off of that great best customer that is probably not indicative of all your prospects. And you really want to be thinking, I think, when you're in sales and marketing, of all those folks, especially those that are most critical or those that are quiet.
Right. And to your point, the people that have said no, like in the sales process, a lot of times you'll see a lot of very similar no's, and there's a pattern there to jump on that can be grabbed quickly and turned into a persona if it hasn't already. But that's a missed opportunity because those aren't the happy customers. Those aren't the quiet customers, but they're ones that we're getting feedback from. So I think that's a great example of kind of a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, and I think when we have often sat in meetings with folks and you ask about their audience, I know that the first person that comes to mind is that best customer that they love, that they have a good relationship with. We have salespeople in the room and owners. Maybe they went golfing with them, or when they get on a call with them, they just enjoy it and it's fun and they maybe joke around. Those are the ones that come to mind quickly. I get it. That's human nature. But if the conversation stops there and it doesn't move past that to, here's the guy that chewed me out last year and canceled his project, and we were worried that they were going to leave us a horrible review. If we're not talking about them, or hey, we had this opportunity, it was such a big opportunity, we were so excited by it, and we put together a proposal, and then they ghosted us, and we asked why 3 months later, and they said this. We don't want to think about that. Of course we don't want to think about it, but those are the things that need to be discussed when we're talking about personas or creating twins.
Especially when you're talking about growth. If you're completely content continuing with selling to the same people and that same persona, great. But at some point, growth becomes pushing outside of your comfort area, and it's more aspirational to turn those past no's into yeses. That's probably one of the most important to consider when you're in that phase of looking to expand.
Yeah, and something that I always say is the challenge that we face with a lot of companies that come to us is that they've built their business off of referrals and, networks. And those are completely different buyers than someone that doesn't know you, has no trust in you, imagines the scenario of hiring you and getting fired because they did it. When you're selling to people that were referred by someone, that person is coming in with trust and rapport, whatever it might be. And when you now transition to an approach where you're saying, well, we got to do marketing and we're going to be reaching out to people cold, those are just totally different conversations, totally different messaging. And what I see over and over is that, people that build off referrals can't get that out of their head. And they keep wanting to do marketing and sales as if they're talking to that person that was sent over with, you've got to work with those guys.
Because that's all they know.
It's all they know.
Right.
So they can't get out of that mindset. And guess what? Marketing fails. Sales don't close. And they wonder why, but the reality is that they just haven't retrained their brain to these cold prospects.
Right. Yeah, I feel like we've seen a trend of seeing a lot of businesses like that, especially 5 years ago through the pandemic when people had to like really shake things up and do different things. People that were completely reliant on referrals and word of mouth had to start doing marketing, and that is always a challenge. It's a totally different ballgame. Then you could break it down even further. So like within that, like we see inbound leads come in, and those are people who have already done the research. They're kind of interested in us already. They know what we offer. There's still things to educate them on, but for most part, they're doing a lot of that early, research and understanding. Then you're looking at like cold outreach or ads, and now those are people that are completely unaware of who you are. You're interrupting their day. So it's to that point, it's really important to look at these as separate entities and understand them differently, because the path is not going to be the same.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's definitely a challenge that a lot of organizations face. Over the years, I've seen very few that think outside that box. The other one that we end up seeing too is personas that don't reflect the entire buying committee. And one thing I'm sure you've seen is that we create a persona for that decision maker. Again, I've worked with a lot of companies that come in and the only person that they want to talk about is the decision maker.
Right.
And that's not what a true real world buying committee is. Again, back to that messiness. What you don't see is that in my book, I've got the decision iceberg, what you see above the surface and what's below the surface.
Yeah.
And, you may have a CTO that does the research, but then tells a project manager to reach out. And you're talking to that project manager thinking they're the main contact, but they were just kind of a communication channel. Or you really focus on the CEO, but what you don't know internally is that he likes to let other people make the decisions, but just be informed or maybe provide a little bit of guidance, but he's not going to be the end decision maker. Or you've got somebody behind the scenes, I always say a CFO, that hears about the deal, and what they do is they go out and research 5 cheaper options and send it out to the team. And you're not thinking about that person, you're ignoring them. Or the one that it's funny, but it's real, is the spouse. You have a decision maker, they go home and they talk about this. And they're, that person's like, oh, I know someone, we use someone at my company. Or they're just like, they complain about it, whatever it might be. It's a real scenario. Right. And it should be obviously you're not going to create these strategies to speak to the spouse, but nonetheless, you want to understand the dynamic of decisions,
right,
and how that's done.
And we talk often about the idea of not just decision makers, but also the researchers and the influencers that make up that greater buying committee, because those perspectives are all going to come from very different places. Like you said, the CFO is going to look at, a technology purchase very differently from the CTO or the project manager. So I think understanding the people in the room involved, through the process is super important to understand the perspective.
That's something that I go into in the book a little bit, is removing the layer of, labeling these folks as decision makers, researchers, and more transitioning to, what role they're playing. Are they the antagonist? Are they the champion? Are they, the person that always tries to find the alternative? It's this shift of mindset from you've got a researcher, a decision maker, these kind of old labels, to more of you've got this committee of personalities You may even have multiple, like 2 challengers. And then understanding their perspective from that. Like if they're challengers, what is it that they commonly challenge, especially related to your solution? If you're thinking about like, well, in a sales process, we have challengers, and one is a price challenger and one is a, efficiency time challenger. And we've got to be able to, if they come into the meeting and they challenge based off of that, we have to speak to it. Or if we've got a champion, the other thought is how do you take that person and give them the assets and the resources and the messaging to continue to be a strong champion for you. And so I think in this piece, and as I go into in the book, is really changing up this whole dynamic of how you see decision committees, if you even see them. Again, I've had way too many clients. There's only one conversation is the decision maker. Right. And again, just like we talked about with the previous trap, is that if you're in that mindset where you've got one decision maker and you're always building your messaging, your assets, your process for them, you're probably not going to be closing as many deals as you could or should.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk more about the whole chaos and now shifting focus to buyer journey. But I think a lot of times we think of it as kind of a straightforward linear path. But to what you had said about the chaos, that plays out in all aspects, including that buyer journey.
Yeah, and it's great. I will say over the last few years, I've seen marketers shift from the mindset of a linear journey to a chaotic journey. I don't know how well that's filtered into businesses and internal marketing teams, but you do see the concept coming up. And I think it's good to add that piece of the puzzle into the other ones that we just talked about, is because not only are the humans chaotic, not only are you biased on the best customers, and not only might you be ignoring some of the buying committee, but the whole process is very crazy. You might have someone that's in a consideration phase and then going into a decision process, but all of a sudden someone leaves in the organization and they take a step back, or you have people as part of this committee that are in different stages themselves. You may be having a direct contact that you're talking to. We've seen this in our own, where we're maybe talking to a marketing manager and they're in their mind, we've got to make a decision tomorrow. But the CMO or the CEO is still in like consideration stage where they, have talked about this, but they're not fully there. And so really understanding the fact of, that funnel, where people come in, where they are in the journey, it moves, and it can be people in different stages at different times. And so I think what the challenge is, if you have a CRM and you're doing that whole, like, I just dragged this person over into, this stage. And if your whole mindset is the company is in this stage, so we have to do this, and this is the way we're thinking of them. If you limit your mindset to that, you really can get just hit over the head with something you don't expect at some point.
Right. Because that process, there's a lot more fast forwarding, rewinding, starting over, running all the way to the finish line, and then disappearing. Right. I mean, it's a good point. You
have to be prepared for it.
Right. And how do you engage with at those different touch points?
And we should judge it at the level of people that are different roles. Just like I talked about, you kind of define people as the challenger, the champion. You may see your champion is in decision mode.
Right.
But you may see your challenger is still in consideration. And if you're now approaching the process from a decision standpoint fully, where it's like, oh, we want to give these final things. We're going to send over a contract, an example contract. We're going to start talking about our onboarding process. And the other person, the challenger, is still like researching and trying to find, alternatives. And you're not speaking to that at all. You're not asking, why are you still looking? You're not asking, like, what are you worried about? Because you think it's here. And so, you see sales folks that do that they have this one track mind where they're just really moving people along the process. And they're just not thinking beyond, here's my contact and here's where they say they're at. And this is what I now have to do because it's been defined that way.
And I think the first step is just understanding that universe on their end where there's other people involved and what is the dynamic that exists and how influential is the person that you're talking to and who's behind the curtain. There's that invisible buyer and, the committee. So,
yeah, I think the solution for this one in many ways is the first three that we talked about is really defining complex buyers. It's defining the people that are not the avid fans and understanding them. And then it's understanding the full buyer committee and these ideas of roles of challenger, of the the activator, whatever it might be. If you do those first three, that last one kind of naturally starts becoming uncovered.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. I was going to mention just, we built Buyer Twin for this reason, where we're talking about the personas and understanding all the perspectives of everybody in the room. Was that where the idea came from? Is just seeing this over the years of just the static buyer persona? Like,
it's a huge part of it, right? Is that, I think as organizations, the old school persona slide is just not effective.
Right.
And so both in the book and then leading into the software, we talk about transitioning to the concept of twins. What you want to do is not have a persona that's this static, hopeful view of your customer. What you want is a complex, deep, authentic, chaotic twin that can leverage AI to be more robust and chaotic internally, but also that you can interact with and test ideas. And so what we've done with Buyer Twin is really create a platform that allows you to have all of these folks very easily. You can build your full buying committee, and then you can go in and you can test messaging against those different personas and say, okay, this is our core message that we use in this part of the sales process. What does this persona think of that? What does that persona think of that? Or twin? You can upload documents and website pages and say, tell me what these different twins think of this. So if you're, sending them the landing pages, you can test that against it. And so it becomes something where a twin is much deeper, it's more chaotic, it's interactive, and it becomes a partner in helping you understand and sell versus, again, a static slide that's probably more myth than reality.
Right. And the persona is much simpler, it's static, and it's kind of one-dimensional, where the twin, you're getting actual feedback from it and asking questions of the perspective. So there's it really comes back to that whole complexity of a human being, right? And it becomes more realistic of an interaction to get that feedback. So yeah, it's
I get it. It's personas are easy. I mean, they're kind of, to me, the lazy person's approach to audience understanding, because it's easy to throw together a slide deck and grab a stock photo Put some random factors in there about 30% male, 60% female. It is a lot more challenging to dig into all of these different folks that you deal with that like you or don't like you. It's more challenging to build out a twin to create depth and chaos. And it's, more effort to go back and continually test messaging against other folks.
Right.
Versus, if you've got that slide deck, you're just kind of taking a message and saying, oh yeah, I think that, Joe Smith, 35, would love this. It's a fallacy. It's lazy. But, it's what probably 99% of organizations are doing right now.
Right. If they're doing that. So it's a start. It's a starting point, but it has evolved and there's ways to catch up with it for sure. So yeah, definitely.
And I think ending on the fact of, it comes back to our belief, and the reason that I wrote the buyer-centric operating system is that if you do understand your target audience better than your competitors do,
right.
If you understand them to this level of depth that we're talking about, marketing becomes so much easier and so much more effective. Sales becomes easier, more effective, quicker to move people through the process. Customer service, you start creating advocates and evangelists instead of just, silent customers. There really is the foundational piece that getting past these biases, creating twins and using them correctly is a true game changer for companies that are looking to grow.
Yep, whole new level. So would encourage everybody to, if you haven't read the book, The Buyer-Centric Operating System, it is available on Amazon and elsewhere. Check it out. Andy put his heart and soul into that one. And then, of course, Buyer Twin. If you guys aren't familiar with Buyer Twin, we mentioned it, so buyertwin.com. That is our platform that you can build out these twins, which is a pretty cool concept. So thank everyone for tuning in. We will see you guys next episode. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning into the Buyer-Centric OS. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and grab your copy of the Buyer-Centric Operating System by Andy Halko, available now on Amazon. For more tools and insights, visit andyhalko.com.